Hello and welcome to the program. My name is Luke Hunt and this is another podcast for The Diplomat. With me today is Scott Johnson. Scott is a filmmaker, journalist, activist. He's spent many a year working in and out of Myanmar. In fact, he's made 70 trips over the border into that very troubled country. Scott, welcome to the program.
Great to talk to you, Luke. Fantastic.
Okay, now you're seeing things a little bit differently. The world is getting more focused on Myanmar, particularly the leaders within ASEAN, and well, it obviously hasn't gone very well, particularly for the Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Sen. How do you see things shaping up?
Well, it's an ongoing thing. We can go back, decades to World War II and beyond, but I think particularly for the mistakes that the international community is making were, primarily focused around the Obama years, with the, this sort of myth emerging out of Burma that Aung San Suu Kyi was going to rise up and bring democracy and freedom and justice for everybody. And the actual plan that was endorsed by the the internationalists at the time, this was always completely doomed to failure. And I hate to say it, but I told you so. But I was saying this back in 2009 because the basic structure of the plan they put forward was right. An inferior one. It's a shambles, basically.
What was wrong with it?
Well, look, Burma it's maligned. We can sum it up in one way. Burma is not really about the Burmese. Burma it's an ethnic country, and they have to start focusing in on being an ethnic country because 70% of the population, roughly, is ethnic people. They're not Burmese. And when you have a ruling class, which is made of Burmese elite, which is basically the Burmese elite military, the military mafia, yep. Being engaged at that time, and when you accept their plan, so the military mafia, the Burmese elite military mafia, put forth a plan to bring democracy to the country, which was never really intended to do that anyway. But they put forth this plan. And the West bought it. The Obama administration bought it. 2016, in 2016, in the White House, I believe, it was Aung San Suu Kyi and the President Obama at the time. They made a statement that we're soon to have a booming tourist industry. Words to that effect. You can look it up. It's all.
Sure.
He talks about we're going to have a tourist industry coming out and. Nothing could be further from the truth. It was always a sham. And the reason was that the military dropped it.
Right, so I was just going to interrupt. It was only a year later that under Aung San Suu Kyi, the military was accused of committing a genocide. It's a bit
yeah, and they went straight for the Rohingyas, right? And that probably has to do also. So they went and massacred a horrific. They threw babies into fires, and forget about whether you want to call the Rohingyas Bengalis or whatever religion they are. Put that aside. They're human beings. And these people, there's credible reports of them throwing babies into fires, the Burmese military. And this was, we're going to have a tourist industry prior to that. It's ridiculous. So, but the international community accepted this military draft of the Constitution, which enshrined military power, and by enabling that, the only way you could change the vote of was have all the government representatives. The military was guaranteed like 20 or 30% of them, and the only way you could change it was if you had 70% of the opposition. So it basically enshrined military power. And the fact, but beyond all that, the hoax of the Constitution that they put forward was the myth of Aung San Suu Kyi. Now, she was Burman, ethnic Burman. She may have some ethnic ancestry there on her mother's side or something like that, but the reality is that she was the NLD was a Burmese party. They ignored the ethnics. They still have this entrenched mentality that we're the dominating nationalist group. So
Right.
if you want to look at India, had a caste system. India has a caste system. Burma has a race system where the Burmese are the majority. So the world's got to stop viewing Burma as being run by Burmans. The UN funded census they did, I think it started back in 2014, and it basically uncovered that the ethnics are a huge population. Probably, look, Aung San Suu Kyi admitted that it was around 60%, but it's probably more around 70. So the Burmese are actually a minority. And to ignore all these ethnic groups in the country, which have their own militias, armies, their own governments, is ridiculous. And that's what the West did. They don't even understand it. So if you talk to politicians and some of the experts, they don't understand the basic structure of the country, the structure and the geography as well, because we roughly have 60 to 70% of the geography under Burmese, under ethnic, which is ancestral ethnic land. So that was it was always doomed to fail. And let's hope they don't make the same mistake again by continuing to ignore the ethnics. So the ethnics really need a voice. And if we look at the Arakan army over in the West, they've shaken the foundations of of this establishment by going on their own, and they're very admirable. The Arakan army are one of these a dynamic force, and they were on the western side of Burma, but they're now seizing control of. Look, the estimates are roughly around probably between 60 to 80% of the country of Burma in the Arakan state is controlled by the Arakan army and the United League of Arakan.
Okay, we'll get there in a minute. Now, the Special Advisory Council for Myanmar released a report last month basically saying that the NUG, the National Unity Government, has effective control of more than 50% of the country, at about 52, 53, and that 20-odd% of the country is disputed, while the military has control, absolute control, of just about 13%. This continual recognition and this desire to do a deal with the military, which we saw this year with Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Sen as chair of ASEAN, it seems to be out of kilter with the realities on the ground, which I think is what you're trying to say.
Yeah, 100% out of. It just doesn't make any sense, logical sense. If you look at it from some sort of democratic process is happening or anything, but these figures, I don't know how accurate they are, but who controls it? Because there's so many factions. We have 20 armed groups.
Yep.
In Burma, roughly, right? And even they're springing up new ones recently. Within the Karens, there's a couple different factions. So, who controls Shan State? Does the NUG have power? The NUG would probably have lots of support from the Burmese population.
Right.
Again, that's probably, we're looking at 30, 40% of the population. They're gonna support the NUG above the military. However, does that include the NUG probably have nothing to do with the Arakan state? Are they operating in Shan State? Shan State's 1/4 of the country, and it's a big mess.
Right.
And I think under the Obama administration, it was this rollout, this sort of mass formation, if you like. We're going to keep pumping Aung San Suu Kyi, the myth, probably under Ben Rhodes' guiding ship. These guys made a drastic mistake in going along with this. And, it questions how intelligent or how accurate the people guiding this sort of policies are.
Now,
but look, let's hope the NUG... Yeah, go ahead.
Well, the world is, in terms of global attitudes to Myanmar, has been looking to ASEAN to take the lead. Hun Sen this year was extremely embarrassed on two fronts. The first was when he claimed to have reached an agreement with the military to have the Australian economist Sean Turnell released. and he in fact came out and announced it. Very embarrassed when the military didn't do that, and he had to apologise. The second time was shortly before the ASEAN foreign ministers meet a couple of months back, when, despite Hun Sen's pleas not to, the military executed 4 pro-democracy activists, which sent a dire message to the ASEAN foreign ministers. Well, at the same time, the military is trying to get back into the group after being banned. What does that say? What can ASEAN do next to try and drive the process a little bit further?
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, the Asian countries, as you're taking some sort of lead in this. I mean, clearly the West has failed, and it may be that they're struggling to find. You know, we're going to blame it. Let the Asians deal with it. But looking at the structure of the military, which is in power now, they're doubling down. They have a new dynamic within Burma, and that's the PDF, the People's Defense Forces. Mm-hmm. And probably there is some hope in this thing, because the tide has shifted in some ways, where the Burmese themselves, the ethnic Burmese, now realize that there is ethnics in this country, and we have to include. And they're going to them, seeking them now, because the PDF are now being trained by the ethnic people.
Right.
The People's Defense Forces and
of course the PDF.
The military is holding.
So I was just going to quickly add that the PDF is the basically the military branch of the NUG.
The People's Defense Forces. Now they're probably in different factions as well, and apparently they are. But nonetheless, these are Burmese citizens, Burmese people, ethnic Burmese primarily. There's probably ethnics in there as well. But they're going against the military now. So look, the only thing holding the military regime together is of course power, and that power is through their air power and artillery. On the battlefield, it's unlikely especially in the jungles and remote areas, the ethnics are going to wipe the Burmese military out. The Karen's recently captured posts and various bases in Karen State.
Yep.
There's been a recent atrocity, an airstrike that just hit the news. But, it's through air power and the artillery, the massive amounts of artillery.
This is what I'm hearing, is that the PDF, where previously much of the fighting has been restricted to the jungle, that now they're coming out and they're taking the fight more to the military, and that they've emerged from the jungles. They've been attacking in the smaller villages, and they're reaching basically the perimeters of provincial cities, which is starting to take the fight to the military in areas that they haven't seen before. Are you hearing similar?
Yep. So urban warfare, it's going to be a whole new dynamic. For decades now, the Burmese military have basically been able to wage warfare in the frontier regions, the vast majority of the country, against the ethnic people without having to worry about internal strife. In general, right? Mm-hmm. Now the times have changed, because the Burmese can carry out activities. And I'll just point out, a few years ago, the Arakan Army, in conjunction with some of the other ethnic groups, I believe it was the Kokand and the TNLA, the Tahang, they did an operation where they captured the military in New Mandalay, the military headquarters, which was something, their training school is the equivalent of the Burmese West Point.
Right. And
they took it over, wiped out everybody in it, and then buggered off. They struck, captured. It's basically like capturing West Point, but the Burma version, or wiping everybody out inside and then buggering off. So the capabilities of the opposition, once they start hitting the cities, it's going to be devastating.
Can you see a day when perhaps from the West that we'll see a lot more arms going into Myanmar, probably through Thailand, one would imagine. But can you see the West upscaling the amount of resources that the PDF has to use?
I guess it depends on how the West is going to. Are they going to sit on their hands, or are they going to get involved? Because China's making, this is geopolitical again.
Sure.
What's, is the Belt and Road. It appears to be expanding. There's a giant city, for example, in Karen State called Shui-Koko, just not far from the Thai border. And Shui-Koko was built in a couple of years, and it's a massive city with 500,000 Chinese people move there.
Whoa.
We're talking about, I think there's a hotel for 600 guests. There's massive villas that are built up. And the Chinese built this city in a couple of years. And what used to be, say, a few years ago, this was only a small little outpost.
Right.
A little Koran village, a little outpost. And now it's a gigantic city. There's been lots of reports about it.
Yeah, we've seen similar
drone
developments.
footage of it shows.
Yep. So I was just going to say we've seen similar developments in Cambodia and plans to ship a couple of million Chinese into Cambodia. So that's what we hear. But
it's connected.
Right.
Yeah. It was actually this. Reportedly, the reports are that it was a Cambodian companies, that the same ones in Sihanoukville, that basically destroyed Sihanoukville, right?
Right.
I mean,
yeah, it's not pretty down there.
Those same sort of, they came down and, I knew a guy who is non-political was over in Sihanoukville, and he was moved to tears when he saw how they had destroyed the place.
Yeah,
that was his words.
It's something else.
How the
right. Now, you've done a lot of work with the individual ethnic groups. Can you background us a little bit on the Arakan, and what is it that stops them from fighting as a cohesive unit, which has been the big complaint for a long time?
Yeah, everybody talks about the unity thing, and look, there's probably a host of various reasons, but we definitely have a history of different ethnic groups that speak different languages and ancestral lands. So you're going to have this natural instinct to sort of bond together with your own. But of course, we have divide and rule by the Burmese military, pumping arms, bribing. The Karen leadership, for example, we look at the Karens, the leaders that are running the Karens for over 10 years now. They're completely corrupt. They're putting casinos in Karen State. They've been co-opted by the Burmese, hugging and kissing the Burmese generals. At the same time, we have there's one camp, for example, in Karen State, on the Thai-Burma border, Mela. It has 50,000 Karens there. 50,000, and a few other ethnics, but primarily Karens. Now, this has been there since the 1980s. So we're looking at 30 years, over 30 years, maybe almost 40 years of people living in a giant refugee camp, which is almost like a big concentration camp. And, we have the leaders of the current KNU leadership hugging and kissing the Burmese, taking money, building casinos across the border. And this is the problem. With the Arakans, they had the Northern Alliance, which was 4 groups. Then they had the Three Brotherhood Alliance. So they are cooperating to some degree. As I mentioned, the attack on the Mandalay, the Burmese military academy, was done by a combined force of ethnic. And the Arakans are going to lead, are one of the big leaders in this. Very, very smart leadership. The general, the people that are running I'll tell you an interesting aspect about the Arakan was that they started out with about 20 students. And out of the blue, I think in 2009, so 20 students got together and said, hey, let's do something. And suddenly we have one of the leading, most dynamic forces in Burma operating from 20 students. So, and a lot of them didn't have military training. Mm-hmm. And this was the interesting aspect of it. They weren't trained by the Burmese military or other things. So I believe that they were able to look at this from a more objective point of view. For some reason, whatever it is, you got to salute them because they managed to. They're setting up the administration for their own country and very dedicated. I've met with them numerous times, and My hat's off to them. I salute them wholeheartedly. And
Right.
so the efforts are being made to that. What people have, if the West wants to get involved, probably they need to work about focus on the ethnic people, and not exclude the Burmese, of course, but we need to see them for what they are. They're the indigenous people of the region as well, and they've been there for 1,000 years or so, and they need to be included. So some sort of federation, some sort of, even autonomy, whatever it's independence, whatever level it has to be done, but they need to be included. And when they become unified, which I think they could if someone was to take the initiative and do it, you'll see a rapid change in that country.
Well, I'm wondering, going back a little bit, as you mentioned before about Aung San Suu Kyi's faction basically being simply another faction of the Burmese. What's going to change within the NUG if the NUG is primarily representing Aung San Suu Kyi's interests and her political faction?
Yeah, look, it's unclear I'm not sure that they are representing totally her. I think she is as a sort of a leading force. Look, I'd kind of say it's probably dead in the water.
Yep.
The fallback is pretty bad. Nobody, most ethnic people had no attraction to her anyway, that I know. And the leaders of those large groups, the Kachin Independence Army, for instance, I met them many times, and went out with them a few times in the front. The Karens, the Arakan, the Kuranis. A lot of these didn't have any great affiliation for Aung San Suu Kyi. Now, the NUG is more inclusive today. They do have ethnic people represent them, and that is very admirable. So I do hope that they can pull something together, but it's hard to say. There's also people now. There's criticisms on both sides, but if it becomes, look, I know one of the leaders is a Kachin guy. I think there's a Karen in there, and it's hard to follow Burmese politics. It really, really is. It's going to be very difficult.
Well, I'll back you up on that, having done
Westerners.
that. Having followed Burmese politics for the last, 3 decades, I'll back you on that one. It's just extremely difficult finding out anything that's happening in that country.
The Western politicians are going to find it extreme. They're going to go over there, and they could travel around the country for 6 months, and they still walk out, and they still don't have an understanding of it. I mean, when I meet them, NGOs that are there, when I meet politicians who have talked about it, and that when they give me their spiel on or their thoughts on it, I go, my God, we've got no hope. So that's the problem. It's the subtleties of Asia are lost on these people, and the history, and a lot of people will, ethnic people, a lot of people in Southeast Asia, when they're talking to them, they're kind of saying yes. They're shaking their head with the politicians and the NGOs, but and I'm reading the situation. I'm going, he really means no. They don't understand the subtleties of that, and that's a cultural difference.
And that's a cultural difference among Asian countries as well. I'm thinking.
Yeah, people get told what they want to hear, that they won't say things in public in a group, that they won't say private. It goes on all these things, but the mistake and the myth of Aung San Suu Kyi in that era of we're going to pump this out. All everybody was talking about was Aung San Suu Kyi, and they were showing me pictures. Burmese are running around with pictures of Aung San Suu Kyi, thinking she's going to save the country. And look, I copped it in the very beginning. They were saying to me, "Oh, you're a negative, you're a pessimist." I go, "This is bullshit. It's never going to happen. Nothing's going to work out this way." And and when I proved them right, unfortunately, I had to actually say to people, "Hey, remember that?" And they sort of, we have kind of ironic joke about it, but it's sad because of the ethnic, and we still have, what is the number of refugees in Australia? Refugees on IDPs, internally displaced people. It's probably it's got to be over 1 million. If you look
including
at
the
Rohingya population.
Right, well, Rohingya, there's 1.4 million now in Bangladesh. There's about 170,000 in Malaysia.
Kachin State?
Yeah, which 21
Yeah.
are in camps, which the UN has described as dire.
Yeah. So where do these people fit in? Where do the IDPs and the refugees? I've been to villages where they just bombed them, actually.
Yeah.
You know, and seen that everybody, they live in the jungle. They're living in very dire conditions, no food. The camps up in Kachin State were getting they had basically $1 a day to live on.
Right. Now,
and,
what you're saying, though...
it's
yeah.
30 years of this now.
But what you're saying sounds like a job more for the United Nations. I mean, some suggestions would include enforcing a no-fly zone over the area controlled by the military, which isn't that big. That would also annoy the Russians and the Chinese, no doubt. Is that possible? And would it be possible to perhaps spend some money and establish some genuine refugee camps? I mean, a little bit more than the ordinary tents. Would it be possible to establish a no-fly zone and build some reasonable UN refugee camps in order to get people out and start planning and deploying from there?
The UN has got, they're doing that, and the Thai government is fantastic as well, because you got to give credit where it's due. They have about, I think it's 8 or 9 camps still in Thailand. They've been there since the 80s. I think there's just under 100,000 refugees living in Thailand. They've been there for like 30 or 40 years or whatever.
Right.
They come at different levels, but the early 80s they started. So the Thais are doing that. There's a lot of people involved. There's the European Union, the Americans, the agencies, the UN, the UNHCR. They're doing that. A fly zone over different parts. The country's big. So how you going to, putting a fly zone up around Kachin State. The Burmese attacked the Kachins in 2011. So the war in Kachin State has been going on since 2011. How would you get the UN to coordinate anything? I'm kind of dubious on whether the UN has the capabilities of doing anything internationally like that. I think they're good aid providers, but I wouldn't trust them. I don't know. It's very difficult to say that whether they have the capabilities to do that.
Right. Well, what would you do? In a perfect world,
I think that
in a perfect world, the problem wouldn't exist.
Well, but I would unite the ethnics in a force, coordinate, give everybody the resources they need, and you can read that however you want. Give the ethnics the resources to establish their own country, and they could overthrow them and the PDF, and they could do it in weeks. The other factors are going to be geopolitical, which is going to be what's China going to do. That's a problem.
Well, this is where we're heading into, is people will keep talking up, Cold War II, which I think is nonsense. But I think we are seeing a redefining of the borders of influence around Southeast Asia, and this great frontier north of the Thai border seems to be emerging in Myanmar, where the military is not going to be able to control it, but still it's going to be of great influence in terms of the Western proxies facing off against Russia, and perhaps not so much China, but certainly Russia, which I think is delusional about and attempting to punch above its weight, particularly in this part of the world. But they keep dabbling in Myanmar.
Look, I was with an arms guy one time, an investigator from an NGO, and we found we were on the other side, on the Burma side, right?
Right.
And we got some weapons that we had captured, weapons that were found, and he went through, and he was going through them and stuff like that. Some of them were Chinese-made weapons,
Mm-hmm.
There was old M16s from presumably left over from the Vietnam War, M1 carbines even. But there was interesting. There was some stuff that came out of Kachin State, and it was Swedish-made stuff.
Right. That's all.
What Sweden doing, pumping weapons, and they basically tracked these weapons, and I think it went to India. The Swedes had sold it to India, then India had sold it to the Burmese, and then the Kachins had captured it.
Right, so they'd sold it to the Burmese military.
Who's funding who and who's funding what. It's clear that the West is not really doing much with Burma. I think they tried the Aung San Suu Kyi method. That completely blew up in their face. The Rohingya massacres then came aboard. The ethnics are still abandoned. What about all the refugees? I mean, so I don't think, on theory and paper, you could probably come up with a great solution. Let's arm the ethnics, let's arm the PDF, and let's overthrow. I think that the Burmese military are I think they're on the edge of the cliff.
Right.
The only thing holding this thing together is the fact that they're facing the gallows, and they want to hold on to power as long as they can. How can they stabilize a country that hates them and they live in a complete military police state?
And as
the Burmese populations now is rising against them. It wouldn't surprise me in the next few months we see something, because the wet season is going to end. Well, ending now as we speak, actually.
Indeed,
so
it is.
I would expect an escalation, but yeah.
No, the wet season is ending. We're seeing that across the region. It's been quite a wet season too. We've had a 3-year drought, and that would appear to have come to an end. What would you expect to happen as the rivers recede and the rain stop?
What's going to happen in the future with the wet season ending? Look, I can only speculate that it's going to be a massive increase in fighting. We've already started to see some of the reports coming through. Maybe there'll be some sort of general offensive with the PDF involved as well. And a massive uprising like this could possibly even topple the government. I just think, again, the only thing that's holding the government together is, government supplying the artillery and aircraft, helicopters, jets,
right,
and so forth. I think otherwise the Burmese military is finished.
Right. Well, putting on my cap as an armchair general, which I tend to do these days, what would that involve? I mean, if you were to literally overthrow the military, march through those massive highways into Napier Door, or seize buildings in Yangon, take the radio station and declare victory, how would you see that happening? I know it's a bit of an out there one.
Yeah, and it's out there. It's a big speculation. I mean, are all the ethnics, are they coordinated enough? And I think that certainly ones like the Arakan Army are capable of doing exactly that.
Right.
These guys are highly motivated, and if we took a leaf from them, look, it could be done. I think with the right, if the right structures were in place and supports were there, I would envision that the military guys would be wondering, there's rumors that they're going to go to Cambodia. I mean, I've heard years ago that they had some deal that if anything goes down, the Burmese generals are going to head off to Cambodia.
That would put Cambodia in an interesting position.
Look, in finalizing up, you've got to recognize that the ethnic people count, that these are 60, 70% of the population, and they need to be included in the Burmese. And then the key denominating factors are that all the ethnic people distrust the Burmese military. Now we see a new dynamic where the PDF, the People's Defense Forces, the NUG, appear to be realizing that if they had the right support, and you can interpret support and resources however you want it, but it's quite feasible to get rid of that regime and install some sort of autonomy and federation.
Right.
And take a lead from the Arakans. They're already doing it. The Arakan Army, they're already basically doing exactly that.
And on that note, Scott Johnston, thanks very much. It's been a terrific chat.
Yeah, thanks, Luke. It's always great to chat. And, thank you very much.
Okay, we'll do it again soon.